Hey, beautiful soul. Welcome in for another episode of Spirit Speakeasy. This week, we are continuing one of our most popular series here on the pod, Ask a Medium Anything. And today, we are diving into things like the clairs. If you ever heard of the clairs, clairvoyant, clairsentient, we're going to explain all of the clairs. We're going to talk about energy protection tips, how mediumship really works, and a few other of your questions that you have sent in. It's one of the most fascinating questions I get asked that I'm going to deep dive today. How do mediums actually see or hear, and I'm using the air quotes, spirit, and is it different for everyone? We'll explore what's really happening during a soul-to-soul communication, how the blending of energy allows spirit or the spirit person to share their memories, emotions, and personality, and why no two mediums or even no two readings ever unfold exactly the same way. You'll learn what's actually happening when we experience those subtle clairs, that sixth sense, the information that's received beyond our five senses. Every clair explained. I'm going to give you a quick overview of them, plus a brand new one that I just learned when I was working on this episode. How mediums translate symbols, emotions, memories into clear and meaningful messages or details during a sitting, why spirit people might communicate differently from session to session, and we'll wrap up with a listener favorite, are mediumship readings draining, and how does one protect their energy or clear their energy after a reading? So whether you are a developing medium, a curious intuitive, or simply fascinated by what's possible with the unseen world, this episode gives you behind the scenes look at what's really happening when a medium connects with the spirit world. So I'm going to dive right in. Again, this is the sixth in the series. So if you don't hear your question in this episode, there are 5 other Ask a Medium episodes, and I try really hard not to repeat the questions or the answers. And you can always send in your question for the next in this series, because I'll keep going with this series for as long as we have the pod. So let's dive in with our first question. How do mediums actually, quote, see or hear the spirit world or the spirit person? And is it different for everyone? Okay, this is a great question, but it's a little bit of a loaded question. So it's going to be a little bit of a long answer because I really want to deep dive and unpack this for you. Of course, I can't speak for every medium, but from my experience after meeting and working with probably at least a few hundred mediums over the years of my own development, there are certain aspects that seem to be true and possible for almost all mediums. That being said, every medium has their own mediumship and our own relationship with our mediumship that is deeply personal and unique within these similar experiences. Let's get more specific. I'm going to really keep peeling the layers back with this one because I know some of you are developing yourselves, and this is an important question. So what's happening for all of us as mediums is soul-to-soul communication. It's a blending of souls, the medium soul or the person in a body with the disincarnate soul or the spirit person who's outside of a body. This blending of souls creates or allows a mystical experience. As they blend their souls with ours or with mine as a medium, they can trigger certain experiences and emotions, mental pictures, memories of sounds. That could be something like a song, a word, a phrase, sensations, sometimes in our physical body, or just the knowing of a sensation, like the memory of a sensation, like a headache or an injury, let's just say, and so much more. And when we receive one experience after another from the spirit person, that is how the story or the session builds. We continue to blend further as the session goes on, or that's what I do. And that's how I'm trained. So I know there's lots of other mediums trained in this evidential style. And with each new experience that the spirit person is helping me receive, I am getting more and more details, emotions, things about their story and what they're needing to communicate in that session. So this is facilitated by the power of our soul, the energy of the soul, let's just say, and love with a capital L, that love that we share, that pure, unconditional, divine love that lives within our souls and between us. Even if we had a challenged relationship with that person, they still have love with us. And when they cross over to the other side, they are the strongest best version of themselves, even if they had a lot of challenges or complications in their human form, in their physical body. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'm going to keep diving in as we go. But one of the things that we all have in common as human beings, regardless of the specific details of our life, is this spectrum of human emotions, right? We all feel sad. We all feel lonely. We all feel discomfort. And it might apply in different scenarios in our lives, but we all have those emotions in our own personal ways. The emotions are similar, even if the situations in which we experience them in our lives are very different. So it's through the emotion that we understand and connect as human beings, right? So it's through this emotion that we understand each other, and it's how we understand the spirit people. So here's where I'll quickly explain the sixth sense, aka the subtle senses, or aka the clairs, quote unquote. So the clairs are something that is used as an abbreviation for these subtle senses. The sixth sense is actually a group of senses, and they're essentially ways of receiving intuitive or mediumistic information, right? It's a channel in which we receive information. So I'm going to talk quickly about the difference between subjective and objective. You'll hear me often say it as like objective and subjective, just because I want to really differentiate those in my speech. They're pronounced normally though. So subjective is when we're having an internal experience, seeing something in your mind's eye. When I'm telling you a story about my day and you can imagine the pictures, you can imagine me doing some errands, running to the store, standing in the checkout line. You're imagining that inside, whereas objective is seeing something outside of ourselves. So if you are someone who has seen like an orb outside of yourself, or kind of like a shadowy representation of a person in your life or in your home, that's objective, outside of ourselves, kind of like you and I would see each other if both of us have good physical eyesight. So it's outside of ourselves. Most of the clair experiences are subjective, meaning internal to the person receiving the information or perceiving the information. And clairs really are sensory channels, extrasensory. That's why they call it extrasensory perception. So extrasensory channels through which information is received and perceived. And while these ways of receiving information may sound separate, and it used to be taught that each of these is separate, maybe you've heard like, oh, you're a clairvoyant, or this person is a clairsentient. It's not actually quite correct in the way I was taught and in the way we understand it today. We understand them as all part of the same instrument, is the way that I have really come to understand it in a deep way. So essentially, if we're going to compare it to an instrument, like the way the piano has the encasing, that's one part of the piano, the strings, the keys, the pedals, they all have separate facets, separate functions, but they work entirely together. So that's how I like to think of these clairs. And this is based on what I was taught by my one of my amazing mentors, Andy Bing, who you guys know I talk about a lot here. We all have all of the clairs that I'm about to list, even if some of them seem initially stronger than others. All of them can be trained to function optimally, and we all have all of them, whether you identify as a medium or not. We all have these. Clairsentience is clear feeling, is what that word means. It really is sensing physical sensations or emotions that convey information. For example, you could understand if you closed your eyes and allowed yourself to imagine, and all of these clairs work alongside the faculty of our imagination, again in Andy Bing teaching. So you could close your eyes now and probably imagine the sensation or feeling of being at an airport, excited for a big trip, versus the sensation or feeling of going into a church or a sacred space, whether it's a church or a mosque or a sacred location on the planet. It's a different feeling, right? So that's essentially how the clairsentience works in a nutshell. Clairvoyance is clear seeing, receiving information through inner or outer visual impressions. So you might, in your mind's eye, see an image, a memory, an object, a scene, right? But it's in your mind's eye, it's internal. And a lot of us get confused here because we think, oh, well, that's my imagination working to imagine. Well, sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not, because the imagination is so intertwined with these clairs and the way that it works to come into our awareness in ways that we can understand. For example, I might see a mental image of Europe or Hawaii along with a feeling of that place if I've been there. And the other thing to note here is these clairs work through the medium's own experience, which we'll talk about that. But they're not giving me a picture, like a photo in my mind of their trip to Hawaii. They're giving me a picture in my mind or helping me receive a picture in my mind about an understanding I have of Hawaii. I have been to the islands a few times, so it could be something I experienced when I was there, but it could also be I've watched movies. I keep thinking of that Adam Sandler movie, 51st Dates with Drew Barrymore. That takes place, part of it on the islands of Hawaii. So sometimes I could even see a picture from a movie, and then it's the feeling of, oh, I went to that place, or, oh, my parents are going to go to that place. So that's sort of how that works. That's the clairvoyance, the clear seeing. And remember, most of it's internal. Clairaudience is clear hearing. Clairaudience, clear hearing. It's hearing internally, and it's not like a disincarnate voice talking in your head. It's often in your own voice, or it could be in the memory of someone else's voice. It feels a little different than that inner self-talk, but it's quite similar to that, actually. It's hearing things like words, names, tones, songs, I get quite often, or sounds internally. It can be external, but like I said, 95% of these experiences are internal. So sometimes when I'm doing a reading, I actually hear the melody of a song. I just had this recently with a person whose partner had passed to the other side, and they were giving me, it's a very old song. I want to say like a Smokey Robinson type song, if you even know who that is. And I said it to them, and they were like, oh my gosh, that's his favorite singer. So that can work that way. There's lots of ways that this can work. Claircognizance is clear knowing. You just know. Have you ever had it where like you don't know why you just know, you don't know how you just have a feeling, or you just know? Well, that is claircognizance. Information arises as an understanding without necessarily a bunch of factual details or clear context or prior knowledge of context. We just know. So simply just knowing someone's name, it doesn't mean that I receive it in thought words or that I see it in my mind's eye. It's that I just suddenly know. This happens sometimes for the cause of passing, or even what they're trying to communicate. Sometimes I just might know, and I don't know how I know necessarily, except for that I know it's the claircognizance or clear knowing. And remember, we all have all of these. So I'm not surprised if as you're listening to this, you're thinking, oh yeah, I have had kind of an experience like that. Clairgustance is clear tasting, receiving information through a sense of the taste. It's typically not like the actual taste, like as if you were eating, I don't know, a cinnamon muffin. It's probably not the same taste, but it's like the memory of the taste of it, the memory of the taste of things like coffee or mint or a favorite food connected to the communicator. It's not exactly the actual taste, but more like the memory of the taste. If you have a loved one that's a great cook in your family, whether they're on this side or the other, you can kind of imagine the taste of their holiday special meal that they make, let's just say. While fact checking these, okay, I'm going to move on to this one that I just learned that I didn't know. There's also clairsalience, which is the smell. That's for some reason that didn't make it on my list, but that's clear smelling. And sometimes it's like you just remember the smell of, where I often get this is like the smell of the person, the smell of their perfume. I just had it recently with someone's nan, their grandma that had passed, and I was very aware of the memory of the smell of like that Pond's cold cream. It's like a very specific lotiony smell, and my sitter knew exactly what it was. So think about the smells that you can remember in your life right now, even if you're not currently smelling it. It's like the memory of the smell. So this one that I learned that I hadn't quite heard of before was clairchronometry. 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 It's sensing of time, which I've always had this, and I didn't realize there was a separate clair for it. Essentially, it's perceiving information connected to a specific point on someone's personal timeline, past, present, or potentials for the future. Like I was saying with that trip, I might be aware, oh, we're going on a trip. It's not in the past, it's in the future. It hasn't quite happened yet, or we're planning it now. So I just, for whatever reason, part of my work has always been a decent awareness of the timeline. So sometimes someone from the spirit world might be communicating about something that happened around the time of their passing. And then as part of the story they're sharing, I'm aware that we're moving way back on the timeline to when they were much younger in their life, for example. It's just being able to sense without relying on linear cues. It's not someone giving me a date. It's not predicting time as in fortune telling, but rather feeling where we are in their life, the energy or memories of that phase in their life, and like where on the timeline it is. Those of you that ever worked with me as a student, you hear me talk about the timeline a lot. Mine often in my mind's eye, if I'm going to receive it visually, it looks like kind of like an old school history timeline when you used to draw the line with the little ticks to remember what years things happened. I typically don't see the years or don't receive the years. I just kind of know, oh, this is when you were much younger, or this is when you were a kiddo and they're talking about these memories. So we can perceive different points on the timeline. Not everything is right now, especially if it's a person in the spirit world wanting to share the story of their life. It's often a different position on the timeline. And sometimes they're talking about something that's coming up right around the corner. I know we've talked here about spirit people not predicting our future because the future is not pre-decided. But if it's something that we already have decided that's coming up just around the corner, they will know about it and they often will share. I had this most recently with someone that's doing some family planning, and they're in their own partnership talking about the potential of bringing another child into the world. And the spirit person was sharing like, oh, I'm going to be a grandparent again. They're talking about creating another baby. And I brought that information to them and they were like, oh my gosh, no one knows that. We just were talking about that just this past weekend. So that's something that's hasn't happened yet. It's not predicting the future. They've already been discussing it. So that is clairchronometry, however you say that word. It's a weird word. Like I said, I'm just learning it. So that is that. The way the spirit person would get me to tell their story with all of these clairs, we're blending souls, and then I'm receiving these mystical experiences of often a memory, a feeling, a sound, and they're all together at once. It comes very quickly and the energy moves very quickly. So the way a spirit person would get me to tell their story of, let's say, their illness, hypothetically, is likely very different from the way they'd get you as a medium, if you're a medium, to share their story, because we have different memories as individual people and different experiences. So again, they use the medium's life experiences and emotions to get as close to the story they're wanting to share as possible. So I might have a memory in my mind of a time that I was in the hospital, and I know, oh, okay, we're in the hospital in this memory. Versus maybe you're someone that's never been in the hospital and you remember visiting a parent or a grandparent or a friend in the hospital, and it might come that way for you. Or you might just get the feeling of a hospital if you've ever worked in a hospital, let's just say. So they're using our own experiences as a medium to share their story. And then each spirit person may also play my instrument slightly differently. Like I was saying, I visualize the clairs as an instrument. We each are, as a medium, have our own unique instrument, and they play a little bit differently because of our different memories. But then the spirit person might play our own instrument a little bit differently, slightly different in each scenario, using different memories, different emotions, experiences to get me to express the exact same illness. So one person that was in the hospital might help me might help create a visual internal experience of the time I was in the hospital. And then I'll know, oh, I was in the hospital. This is hospital. Whereas another person, to help me understand their illness, might bring up to my mind a time when I visited someone else in the hospital, and I would still realize, oh, hospital. So there's different ways to get the same information across. Now, why are they using those different things? There's always so much more packed into every mystical experience than meets the eye or meets the first glance, I'll say. So often it has to do also with the feelings around that specific memory. Perhaps it has to do with the actual illness itself. Perhaps it has to do with which person I am in the memory. So there's lots of reasons, and it's unique to everyone because each person's story is totally unique. Even the stories that are quite similar. In the last few years, I've had several readings with spirit people who have passed due to COVID. And even though their cause of passing was all COVID related, the personal experience of each person was a little different because they're a different person, right? So we have similarities, but specific differences, and they all will also communicate slightly differently and use different memories. Sometimes it's to get as close using my memories as they can, but sometimes it's that's the way they're communicating. And I've even had the same spirit person, for example, if I am reading for a different family member of that same spirit person, I might have the same spirit person use completely different ways to get me to tell their story. Now, why is that? Well, it could be because if I feel like it's the exact same and I'm remembering, I'll get two in my head and I won't be able to honor their story in the same way because I'll be like, I already know this. I already know this person. Or it could just be because in the last session, I was communicating with their mom. And now in this session, I'm communicating with their adult child, let's just say, meaning like my recipient, my client, is like a parent versus a child of this spirit person. So they would want to share their memories differently, and there would be different emotions for each of these people. So they would want to tailor it to what they want to communicate to that specific individual as well. So there's lots going on, as you can imagine. I've seen in meditation our sixth sense, like I was saying, the subtle senses, the clairs, work like an instrument with almost like these energetic strings to pluck, and they can pluck up, or as they blend with us, trigger, create to our awareness different memories. Keys to play a melody, to invoke, to help us share their story, right? And they're all doing it in a different way. So just like a musician, one musician might play the bass in one way and a different one might have a slightly different subtle vibe to them. It's sort of similar. And again, I always complain about this, but there's not exact words to match this mystical experience quite right. So please know I'm doing the best I can with the human language, but it's still not exactly quite right, because it is a mystical experience. So each of our instruments as a medium holds our own memories, experiences, emotions, references, etc. So there's lots going on during this communication all at once. We used to, in my development group, we would ask our teacher, Andy, being like, well, how are you receiving all this? And how are you making it seem so easy? And he would always joke and say, it's like a duck paddling across the water. All you see is this graceful duck or swan, cruising across the top of the water, but underneath they're paddling and working and blending and figuring it out. So that's essentially how it's working. I always loved that example because it just felt so right to me. Okay, so our next question kind of is the next follow through that I would want to talk about with this, so it's perfect. When spirit people use symbols, memories, or emotions to communicate, how do you translate that into words as a medium? This is a great question. I have a feeling some of these are from developing mediums. So the spirit people are always using all of the clairs all at once, in different proportions depending on the communicator. So when I first started developing any of these gifts, what I was told, or what I always heard, was just say what you see in your mind. And over time, and through, again, my mentor, Andy Bing, and a couple other mentors I've worked with, and others, I learned that we are receiving lots of information all at once, like we just talked about. And as part of this, there's a working understanding what they're trying to communicate using all of the above. So often, there will be a memory that I'm receiving, but there's also at the same time emotions. There might also be sounds happening in that mystical experience that I'm having. All of these things are happening all at once. Some of them might feel more obvious than others, but I'm using all of the information they're conveying as best as I can and trying to perceive as much of it as I can at once. And then I will communicate the details little by little. That's a big key to this too, is sometimes I will do the mental math and say like, oh, okay, they're doing this, so that must mean this, and I'll jump ahead. For example, I had someone that was like did dirt bikes or motorcycles when they were young, and I, in my mystical experience, was aware of a number on the front of their motorcycle, like those street racing motorcycles. And in my mind, I jumped right to, oh, you must have raced motorcycles competitively when you were young. And they said no. And I said, okay. So I backed it a little bit and I said, let me understand, can I understand it this way? Did you, on your dirt bike, your motorcycle, did you have a number on the front of it? Like there's almost like a race number, like 3-digit number on the front of this bike that you had? And they said yes. So it was me making too much of it, whereas what I was actually aware of was them doing these trails and jumps on their own or just with friends outside, and this number on the front. I wasn't actually aware of the race. I kind of put that on it. So we can kind of misinterpret is the best, closest word. But it's very specific what we're receiving, often much more than we realize. So little by little, I'll communicate the details. And then my client or recipient, I just want them to say yes, no, or I don't know. Either it's correct, it's not correct, or they just don't know. Like when I've received readings, I've received details sometimes that I just wouldn't know. For example, I wouldn't know when my grandma was 20, something about her, let's just say. So I just wouldn't know. And any of those answers is okay. But working little by little allows me to make sure that I'm correctly understanding and correctly delivering the information. If they say no or I don't know, there's a lot of things that could be possible that's going on, but it could just be as simple as I've misinterpreted something, like with the motorcycle. So the spirit person, I continue to blend with them, and they will share another experience to further clarify themselves and to clarify the last experience. We can't, I used to hear it say a lot, like go back to the experience and feel into it. Well, we can't go back to the experience because it's a mystical experience that we received in a fleeting moment and it's not there anymore. So we're going back to our memory of the mystical experience, which wasn't right the first time. So it's probably not going to be right the second time. Does that make sense? I hope I'm explaining this clearly enough, and for all levels is my intention here, obviously. So as I continue to blend, I will receive another mystical experience. It might even be quite similar to the one I just received. That's just helping me understand it a little bit deeper. And then I continue working. I'm working the whole time with the spirit person, with my communicator, to do my best job for them. And, I'm human, like we talked about in the last episode. So knowing how to express these things into words is partly just practice and experience, like having enough experience in our own development, and partly working through our own emotions, because if there's an emotion that I haven't processed as a person, I won't understand it properly from the spirit world. And it's also partly spending time sitting with the spirit world, building a relationship. The more you can understand and process your own emotions, and work on your own personal development, the more that the spirit world, the spirit people can access, and the more that we know clearly what to do with what we are receiving. This is something that comes over time and is a continual work in progress in mediumship, in deepening the nuances and specificity, like specifics of the details of the communicator's story that they need to share. So this is something that's never done for any of us. And I always joke because I know it's not the fun part of the work. And my students even get really sick of doing like the personal development, but it really is a huge part of what makes this possible and what makes it deeper and deeper. And then sitting with the spirit world is a really important thing too. And it's not necessarily sitting with the spirit world to intend to force an experience or demand an experience, or even to blend with someone specific. I just move my awareness to the spirit world as a world, to the other side, and just sit there. And it gives them an opportunity to learn how to work with me. The practice part of it, I'm going to keep quoting Andy here probably just because I don't want to take credit for his work. The way Andy says it is like we always think as mediums or someone developing any of these spiritual gifts that it's 90% practice, right? Like getting in there and doing practice, and 10% personal development or sitting with the spirit world. And it's actually the other way around. It's 90% sitting with the spirit world, personal development, and only 10% practice. So I don't know if that'll make you feel better or worse, but that is the way it actually works. This next question that I want to come on to now is, are mediumship readings draining? How do you protect your energy? How do you clear your energy after a day of readings? This is a great question. It's kind of a multi-part question. So for clarity, I'm just going to go through each of the parts of this question separately because they are different questions. So let's start with, are mediumship readings draining? I've learned more and more over the years that this actually fluctuates and changes and is more of a river that I try to flow with than a predictable static outcome. I've had experiences or especially like around group readings when the reading is really energizing and I'm like on a little bit of a high and it takes me a while to come down and settle my energy after that group reading. I've also had sessions that were a lot to hold emotionally, especially if there happens to be like a few in that day that are really tough emotionally. I might just prefer to be quiet and low key for the rest of the day in my own energy. But there were times in my life when I lived with other people that even if I was a bit tired, I still could make dinner and engage and do the things that I needed to do. So unless I'm on the brink of like getting a cold or flu or something, I'm usually not completely knocked out by readings. But there is also the idea of honoring your own energy. And at different times in my work, I've been able to do more sessions in a day or less sessions in a day. And over time, you kind of find that sweet spot. But then even then, things can shift and change, and it can fluctuate based on anything from something like I was saying, being a little run down or tired or under the weather, to what else is going on in my personal life. If I'm having a challenge in my personal life, whether it's like in a relationship or maybe my awareness is drawn elsewhere because someone very close to me is going through something that I'm really supporting, I might feel a little more run down just in my energy, just like all of us, right? If you have someone that's having chaos or trauma that you care about that you're helping, well, you might have less of a bandwidth for other things. It's kind of like that. It could also be affected by the season of the year or the time of day. I have learned about myself that I'm typically stronger in the beginning to middle of the day. And as the day gets later, I don't love doing readings at night. It's just not when I feel the strongest. That's just the way my energy works right now. Who knows? In 5 years or 10 years, I might be the strongest in the nighttime. So it is something to just flow with. And for me, it's become more about trying to honor and manage my energy overall. For example, it doesn't feel good anymore like in my private life to just like stay out late at night. But for someone else, they might find staying out late at night really energizing. Right now, that's not it for me. So I think part of the ongoing journey of our mediumship, just like part of the ongoing journey of our lives, is to know ourselves more and more and what works for us. Even with something like nutrition, for example, I don't love to eat a big meal before I do readings. I don't love to eat a big meal in the middle of meetings. I'll have like little meetings. I'll have little snacks sometimes if I need it just to keep my energy and my blood sugar stable, but I probably would eat later or much earlier, let's just say. So it's just the little nuanced things that we learn about our body and ourselves that are all a part of this work and a contributing factor. Now, the next part of this question was, how do you protect your energy? Okay. Let me start by saying I don't believe, and it's been my personal experience, that I don't need to protect my energy from the spirit world, from the other side. I always receive some sort of growth or expansion or learning or even sometimes healing from being in the energy of the spirit world. Like I was saying, especially with like bigger group readings, or sometimes I have a client that just in their energy is really fun, and sometimes their spirit person is really fun. Those are uplifting for me too. But I also sometimes receive healing. I'm always learning something. I'm always growing. So I don't believe, and it's not my experience, and I need to protect myself from the spirit world. I do believe that I need to protect my energy in my mediumship as it relates to the people and situations in my regular human life. So I'll give some examples of this and what I do differently on days that I have readings. This is just what's working for me right now. It doesn't mean that it'll always be this way, like I was saying. So I've learned over the years that I need to guard my energy the morning before readings by things like trying to make sure I have extra time to get to the office, and if I'm going into the office. I like to be there early. I typically like to be there about 45 minutes to an hour before my sessions. Some of it's that I want to make sure the temperature is good in there. I want to make sure that the internet's working. I can't tell you the times that I've had to go in and like reboot the internet because it's not quite working. So basically for me, these are things that minimize my anxiety. And also leaving time to accommodate any of the weird things that we might encounter just in our life. I typically over the years have tried to keep my offices not too far from home. So it's not like a huge commute for me. Right now, my office is maybe just like a few miles from my house. Maybe it's under 5 miles for sure. And because I go by in San Diego, if you know, with the zoo, I go by the zoo on my way to the office, and there's a freeway option and a non-freeway option. But for example, like on a weekend or a Friday, I'm not taking the side roads because there's probably going to be a lot of zoo traffic, and you never know, there could be a detour or an accident or just a lot of traffic. So minimizing for things like that works really well for me to kind of orchestrate so I don't have anxiety around getting there, and then I could just chill and go. That's not everybody, obviously, though. I also have learned that I need to be awake enough at the time of readings or events. So this might mean waking up early, or it could mean trying to sleep in. Like if I have a group reading later in the evening, I want to try to sleep in to give myself more energy later. It could be coffee or the amount of caffeine that I'm having that day. Usually I'll keep my errands pretty light. If I do have to like run to pick something up or run, there's a little grocery store not too far from my office. Sometimes I'm going in to grab something for lunch ahead of time, but I keep it very light errands, not anything, if possible, that's going to be super demanding or heavy. But it all depends on how much time I have. Today, I'm going in for readings a little bit later. I'm recording this in the morning at home, my home office, and I have just several hours in the morning. So today, I'm recording this pod that I already had written. I will make my lunch. I will go pick up some prescriptions that I have waiting for me at the pharmacy, and then I'll go to the office, which are very light errands, right? But I have plenty of time, and I still will get there probably an hour before, just because that's what I like to do and answer emails and that kind of thing. So not overexerting or rushing crazy, but definitely being fully awake at least for a few hours before my readings. There was a time where I started very early in the morning. I started taking clients at 8 a.m. Pacific at one time. And before that, I used to do 7:30 Pacific, because sometimes people on the East Coast, it's already 10:30 for them, or I have clients in Australia or different parts of the world. So I just have learned over the years that that's not what works for me. But when I had my kids still in school and living at home, that early time did work for me. So I could be done to get home to pick them up for school or whatever. So that's just what's working for me right now. Another thing that's a little bit sticky is typically there are only a handful of people in my life that I will take non-emergency phone calls from on the morning before a session. I want to be very general because some of the people I love listen to this podcast. And if you're listening, it's probably not you. But, we all have people in our life that we love very much that maybe are challenging people or a little bit unpredictable in their personalities or energy. I'm probably not talking to those people before a session because I want to keep my energy steady. I want to stay pretty chill and upbeat just as a person. So there are very few people that I'm taking non-emergency calls from. Of course, if someone had an emergency, I'm taking that call. And it is what it is. that's just what's working for me right now. So there are certain people that I care about very much that I really won't take calls from before I have readings. I'll just wait and call them back later. That's fine, right? The other thing for me that's very important, which will not apply to everyone, obviously, is my tummy. Some of you know that I have something called ulcerative colitis, which means my tummy is very sensitive and can get triggered by certain things. So basically, I obey whatever is going on with my tummy at the moment of that day and plan accordingly. So sometimes that might mean I can't have coffee that day because my stomach's like on the verge of being flared up. So then I might do tea instead. So I'm just really working with my body and my energy to make it optimal as much as I can for my sessions. And I kind of have a luxury now doing this because I live on my own and my kids are grown and out of the house, and I don't currently have a partner in my life. And I don't, as of right now, which we'll talk about in a future episode, I don't have any little furry babies right now. So that could change if those elements change. But right now, I really do have a lot of control over the way I set up my days. But you might be in a phase where you do still have kids at school or tons of errands to run, or maybe you do mediumship as just a part of your work and you actually still have, in the work we sometimes joke and call it a muggle job, you still have like a non-spiritual job that you have to focus on. So just flex and do the best you can with whatever your life circumstances are right now and whatever you feel like you need in your energy to be the best that you could be in that moment, really, right? I also try to protect my physical health since this is part of me having the optimal personal energy going into sessions. I have worked under the weather, and it is possible to still have a very successful session or group reading or event, but I really don't like to work sick. And the truth is, you pay for it on the other end. So even if you have a lot of energy during the group reading, it really takes it out of you even more on the other end of it. So I'm thinking of a student demonstration that we had many years ago, and a friend and I got sick from someone else that was there, that was sick, that was in the room. It was like a big group of us doing development. We would meet a couple times a year for these like week-long intensive workshops. And there was someone in the room of probably like, I don't know if it was like 40 people. Someone was very sick and got a bunch of us sick basically. But we had this student demonstration, meaning a bunch of the public, people, non-mediums, or some of them were mediums, were invited to be sitters to come to this event. And there were several of us that were going to work as mediums and give communication from the spirit world. I think there was like 5 or 6 of us, and 2 of us, myself and a great friend of mine, were very, very sick to where we were on the fence back and forth of like, are we not going to do this? And we were both able to work and both able to give communication and then drive home. We were kind of far away from home, a couple hours, and we were able to drive home. And then we were both kind of tapped out for a couple days, just exhausted and really in the flu of it all. But it just, in that moment, we felt like we were already there. We'd already been with everyone all week. It wouldn't have been right to put on the other 3 mediums everything and just ditch out at the last moment, because we were getting sicker as the day was progressing. And it was like right before the group reading where we just were like, oh my gosh, this is not good. So it is possible. It's not ideal. And if there was a way to cancel or to reschedule that, or like if I'm going to someone's home to do a group reading or I have an event, I probably would reschedule it, just to be honest. But not all mediums work like this at all, these things that I've described. I just find this is how I feel best and what I prefer, and it really has changed over the years too. Okay, so this next part of the question, how do you clear your energy after a day of readings? Okay, this is a great question. I will say it depends on the day. I'm a little bit of a creature of habit, but I also don't like things too rigid. So sometimes if I feel like I have to do something, it makes me, I'm a little bit oppositional in my chart, those of you that know me. So it depends on the day. Sometimes I will use an energetic tool like something that I call the sticky rose, which I've taught many times. Those of you that have ever been in free workshops or guided meditations or the free community healings with me, you've probably heard me share this tool. It's essentially a visualization of like a rose. And you intend and visualize releasing or shifting your energy as a part of this. So sometimes I'll do that. Most days, it's more about shifting my own energy through things like a relaxing drive home. When there isn't traffic, that drive by the zoo is very beautiful and scenic and lots of trees. And I always see butterflies, and The buildings are really beautiful. And listening to like a podcast that I love or music that I really like, coming home. And I always change my clothes as soon as I get home. And I'm usually fixing something to eat or having some tea. And depending on what I have the rest of the day, I'll reset my energy accordingly. So for me, that is often how I'm just resetting my energy. It's not necessarily clearing like I'm holding on to someone else's energy, but I could do an energetic clearing if I felt like I needed to, and I will once in a while. Right now, these days for me, it's more about intentionally shifting my energy rather than a formal energy clearing, especially depending on what I have going on the rest of the day. This is something I teach as a part of all my courses as well. But like, for example, if I am going to go and see a play or see a comedian or something like that with friends later, I typically will just make sure I'm shifting out my energy. I don't want to totally downshift into like a very tired gear. I want to keep it mellow so I can kind of get back in the swing of things again later. But it really just depends what I have going on. I don't really feel like I need to clear my energy any more from a reading than I do from like running to Costco, for example. So I feel like that's how our energy works. And I don't feel like I need to clear my energy any more from a reading than I do from just like doing errands and being outside. So hopefully that helps and makes sense. What a beautiful conversation today. I really hope this episode gave you a deeper understanding of what's really happening behind the scenes of a mediumship session, that it's not about, quote, seeing or hearing in the way that we do with our physical senses, but it's about that incredible blending of souls through the love that we share and the energy that allows love and memory and emotions to be received, perceived, and translated through us as mediums. You've learned how those subtle clairs work all together, like keys on the same instrument, and that every medium's connection is uniquely different because it's filtered through our own life experiences, memories, emotions, and we're all very unique individual people, this side and the other. We also talked about how to stay balanced in this work, protecting your energy in everyday life and knowing when it comes time to replenish yourself after sharing your light. And remember, mediumship works through the love that we share. It's a soul-to-soul communication and a mystical experience. You have access to your own loved ones, even if you are not a medium at all. If you don't identify as spiritual or sensitive or any of it, you still have access to your own loved ones right now. They're only ever a heartbeat away. They're able to hear you, to feel your emotions, and to spend time with you anytime. No medium required. And if this episode has helped you see the process a little more clearly, I'd love it for you to share it with a friend who's curious about how mediumship really works, or even to leave a quick review wherever you are listening to this or watching this, whichever podcast platform. It helps others find Spirit Speakeasy, and it helps keep our community growing. And if you'd like to learn more about developing your own intuitive gifts or join one of my live workshops, you can always find the latest offerings on my website, joyfulmedium.com. So until next time, remember, your loved ones in spirit are only a thought away, and love never dies. Big hugs, lots of love. Bye for now from inside Spirit Speakeasy.